ordinary morning at West Ridge High School. The kind of morning where backpacks thud against lockers, sneakers squeak on polished floors, and laughter echoes down the hallways. Nothing seemed out of place. No one could have guessed that, in just a few moments, the definition of normal would shatter completely. Two girls walked side by side, laughing quietly, sharing a secret only they knew. Their friendship had always been a little different. Intense, consuming, sometimes even isolating. But no one ever suspected it could turn deadly. Teachers took attendance. Students exchanged glances, whispered gossip, and prepared for another dull day of classes. But in a quiet corner of the school, away from the crowded classrooms and the buzzing hallways, something darker was unfolding. It started with a glance, a pause, a flicker of tension between two best friends. And then violence, swift and shocking. A scream tore through the hallway like a fire alarm. Within seconds, chaos replaced calm. Doors burst open. Teachers ran. Students froze, eyes wide with disbelief. Lying on the cold tiles was a girl, her white uniform stained crimson. The other girl stood above her, hand trembling, a small knife slipping from her fingers, clattering to the ground with sound far too final. And then came the words, the chilling, unforgettable words that would haunt everyone who heard them. I stabbed her in the neck. How does a friendship end in blood? What drives a teenage girl to kill the one person who knew her better than anyone else? This isn't just a story of jealousy or rage. It's a story of obsession, secrets, and the terrifying reality that even the purest bonds can be corrupted. What happened in that school hallway didn't begin that morning. It started much earlier. And before we reach the end, you'll see how innocence can become dangerous and how a single moment can destroy everything. Welcome to Crime Chronicles Confidential. This is not just another true crime case. This is a descent into the heart of teenage darkness, where loyalty is tested, reality is blurred, and betrayal is fatal. Keep watching, because nothing is what it seems. Behind the brick walls of West Ridge High, where banners celebrating academic excellence flutter in the breeze and cheerful posters line the hallways, a silent war was brewing, one that no teacher noticed, no counselor suspected, and no classmate dared to fully understand. It wasn't a war fought with fists or loud arguments. It was subtler than that. Hidden glances across the cafeteria, sudden silences in conversation, inside jokes that turned sharp. It was a friendship that had once been inseparable, now fraying the edges with a quiet kind of malice. Emily and Sarah had known each other since the 7th grade. They weren't just friends. They were shadows of one another. Where one went, the other followed. They shared clothes, passwords, secrets, even dreams. But something changed in the months before the incident. It started with small things, missed calls, unread messages, a cold tone in the voice that hadn't been there before. Friends noticed but couldn't quite put their finger on it. It was like watching a mirror crack. Slow at first, then suddenly shattered. Behind their perfect smiles and social media posts, there was tension, a competition that had been growing silently. Who was more popular? Who was getting better grades? Who was getting more attention from the boy they both secretly liked? Jealousy crept in like smoke under a closed door, and with it came suspicion. Was Sarah talking about Emily behind her back? Was Emily trying to steal Sarah's spotlight? The trust that had once been the foundation of their bond began to erode. But they kept pretending, smiling for selfies, laughing at jokes, telling everyone they were still best friends. But in private, the dynamic shifted. Sarah began controlling the narrative, deciding who Emily could talk to, where she could go, what she could post. Emily started keeping things to herself, writing in a secret journal, becoming distant. Their friendship had stopped being a comfort. It had become a cage. Then came the text messages, dozens of them, deleted before anyone could see. Heated arguments, veiled threats, accusations that would make anyone's stomach turn. The school remained oblivious. Teachers praised their teamwork on group projects. The principal mentioned them in morning announcements. But the truth was festering beneath the surface. One day, Emily wrote something in her diary that would later be used as evidence. She wrote, "If she pushes me one more time, I swear I'll snap." No one read it then. No one saw the red flags. No one imagined that teenage emotions, so easily dismissed as drama, could escalate into something unthinkable. So, was it a moment of impulsive rage? Or was the murder premeditated? Planned down to the exact location, time, and weapon? Investigators would later find searches on Emily's phone. How deep does a knife have to go to hit a jugular? What happens if someone dies in school? Are teenage girls sent to jail? Those weren't the questions of someone caught in the moment. They were the questions of someone preparing. Behind those school walls, there was no screaming fight, no public fallout. There was just a quiet storm, building pressure, waiting to erupt. And when it did, the question wasn't who did it. Everyone saw. The question was why. Was their friendship gone wrong? A silent rivalry that turned deadly? Or was it always headed this way? Two girls playing a dangerous game, and one of them finally deciding to end it? Behind the walls of West Ridge, there were no alarms, but there should have been. They say children are mirrors of their environment, reflections of what they see, feel, and absorb from the world around them. But what happens when that mirror cracks? When the face staring back isn't innocence, but something darker, calculated, cold, and capable of violence? In the aftermath of the bloodshed at West Ridge High, one question echoed louder than all others. Do we really know our children? Emily wasn't the type of girl anyone expected to see in handcuffs. Teachers describe her as polite, intelligent, articulate. She volunteered for school events, smiled at strangers, and held doors open for the elderly. Her grades were above average. Her record was spotless. She had a quiet charm, the kind that made parents say, "I wish my daughter was more like her." But none of that mattered when she confessed to stabbing her best friend. None of that mattered when she said she had been thinking about it for weeks. Inside Emily's mind was a labyrinth of emotion that no one had explored, a place filled with resentment, hurt, jealousy, confusion, and eventually hatred. Her parents insisted they never saw any warning signs. She had no history of violence, no signs of depression that they could identify, no record of therapy or medication. And yet, she had written about killing Sarah in her diary weeks before the murder. She had rehearsed what she would say to the police. She had thought about the blood. Experts in adolescent psychology were brought in. They studied Emily's social media, her journal entries, her phone logs. They interviewed her teachers, her classmates, even her little brother. The more they looked, the more disturbing truth came to light. Emily had mastered the art of pretending. She knew how to act like everything was fine, even as she spiraled. The smile on her face was a mask. The good behavior was a performance. And no one, not her family, not her friends, not even Sarah, ever saw behind it. But this isn't just Emily's story. It's a story about all of us, about what we don't see, what we refuse to see, and what we are too afraid to confront. We underestimate the emotional depth of teenagers. We dismiss their pain as mood swings, their isolation as a phase, their silence as defiance. But inside their minds, storms are brewing. Some are manageable, others are not. Sarah, too, was complex. She had her own struggles. Her parents were going through a bitter divorce. She was under pressure to maintain her grades, her image, her friendships. She confided in a few friends that she felt like Emily was becoming too intense, too clingy, too controlling. She said she needed space. She never got the chance to take it. What's terrifying is how ordinary everything seemed until it wasn't. There were no demonic drawings, no violent outbursts, no alarming videos. Just two girls, navigating adolescence, friendship, and identity in a world that often demands perfection and gives very little room for error. The real question isn't just why Emily killed Sarah. It's how no one saw it coming. How a teenager, barely old enough to drive, could make the decision to take a life. How the system, the school, the community, the family, failed to notice the quiet signals that something was very, very wrong. And so we ask again, do we know our children? Or do we only know the version of them we want to see? When they close their doors at night, when they walk the halls at school, when they stare silently at their phones, what are they thinking? What are they hiding? Because the mind of a teenager is not simple. It is a battleground. And sometimes the war ends not in tears, but in blood. Every friendship starts with a spark, an innocent connection, a shared joke, a seat next to each other in class. That's how it was for Emily and Sarah. 7th grade. New backpacks, new beginnings, and two girls who didn't know anyone else in homeroom. Emily was shy, the kind of girl who doodled in the margins of her notebook and spoke only when spoken to. Sarah was the opposite, outgoing, magnetic, the kind of person who lit up a room without even trying. But something about their differences made them gravitate toward each other. At first, it was simple. Lunch breaks spent trading snacks. Study sessions that turned into sleepovers. Matching bracelets, inside jokes, whispered secrets under the covers. To the outside world, they were just two best friends. But to each other, it felt like more, like finding your other half in a world full of strangers. Emily would later describe their friendship as magic. Sarah called it forever. They were inseparable. But not all magic is harmless. And sometimes, forever is shorter than we think. As the years passed, their bond deepened, and so did the dependency. Emily didn't just rely on Sarah for companionship. She needed her. Sarah became her anchor, her mirror, her entire sense of identity. Everything Emily did was filtered through the lens of, will Sarah like this? Will she approve? She stopped making new friends. She deleted posts Sarah didn't comment on. When Sarah laughed with other girls, Emily felt like she was disappearing. At first, Sarah welcomed the attention. She liked being admired, being needed, but slowly, it started to suffocate her. The texts became constant. The questions turned into demands. Why didn't you answer? Who were you with? Why didn't you tell me? Sarah tried to pull away gently. She made excuses, said she was busy, said she needed time for herself. But Emily couldn't let go. Not when this friendship was the only thing in her life that felt real. And that's when something began to change. What had started as love turned into obsession. What had once been loyalty curdled into possession. Emily began keeping track of Sarah's movements, checking when she was online, watching her posts, analyzing every like and comment. She wasn't just afraid of losing Sarah. She was terrified of being replaced. Sarah, on the other hand, had no idea how deep the cracks had run. She thought Emily was just going through a rough patch. She told her friends, she's just sensitive. She'll be fine. But she didn't see the journal entries. She didn't see the fantasies of revenge. She didn't see the rage building behind that quiet smile. It's easy to romanticize childhood friendships, to see them as pure, uncomplicated, innocent. But the truth is, emotions run just as deep, sometimes deeper, in adolescence. And when those emotions twist, when admiration turns to envy, when affection turns control, what you get isn't friendship. It's a trap. Somewhere along the way, their dream world, built on shared secrets and whispered promises, transformed into something darker. A place where love was conditional and loyalty was a weapon. A place where one girl believed that if she couldn't have her best friend, no one could. So was it ever real? Or was a friendship always lopsided, always dangerous, always doomed to implode? Maybe the most haunting part of their story isn't the moment the knife went in, but the years of quiet dependency that made it inevitable. Because sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. Like believing love and control are the same thing. Like thinking obsession is just another word for care. Emily believed she was protecting something precious, but in the end she destroyed it. And all that remained of their once magical world was blood. In the digital age, friendships don't just live in classrooms or coffee shops. They thrive, often unravel, in the shadows of screens. Beneath filtered photos, story highlights, and smiling emojis, whole lives unfold silently, invisibly. For Emily and Sarah, what started as a simple connection between two girls in real life soon spilled over into a constant, unrelenting stream of online interaction. It was through texts, group chats, emojis, and disappearing messages that their bond strengthened and ultimately fractured beyond repair. Their private chat was always buzzing. From silly memes to heartfelt confessions, they spoke more through screens than they ever did face-to-face. Emily would wait for Sarah's replies like they were lifelines. If a message went unread for too long, panic would settle in. And when Sarah started replying later, shorter, Less frequently, Emily noticed. Noticed and internalized. The first signs of a shift came through group chats. What had once been a space for jokes and shared secrets now became a battlefield of passive-aggressive comments and subtle exclusion. Sarah began replying more to others than to Emily. Inside jokes Emily wasn't popped up. Plans were made in the group, but then changed in a private thread without her. She felt the walls closing in. Screenshots became weapons. Emily took them, saved them, analyzed them. Conversations where Sarah laughed at someone else's joke too hard. Compliments Sarah gave to another girl that she never gave to Emily. Photos she posted without tagging her. All of it was stored like evidence. Proof that Sarah was pulling away and, worse, replacing her. But the real unraveling happened on Instagram. Sarah's stories became Emily's obsession. A new hairstyle, a night out, a funny caption Emily hadn't heard before. To Sarah, they were just random posts. But to Emily, they were messages, signals, attacks. She began to read between every line, interpret every emoji. Was Sarah mocking her? Was she hinting something? Why hadn't she liked Emily's last post? Why had she stopped commenting IOI on every selfie? Then one day, Emily noticed something that made her heart stop. A story that disappeared within minutes. But not before she saw it. A boomerang of Sarah with another girl at a cafe. Laughing. Happy. And the caption, new favorite human. Emily stared at it. Her face flushed, her breath shallow. That post didn't just sting. It broke something inside her. The messages Emily sent after that were different. Shorter. Colder. She began posting cryptic quotes on her own account. People always leave. The worst betrayal comes from those you love the most. No one asked questions. No one reached out. Sarah, maybe sensing the shift, texted her, asking if everything was okay. Emily didn't answer, but she was watching. She watched Sarah's followers grow, watched the likes pour in, watched her become someone new, someone confident, popular, independent, someone who didn't need Emily anymore. And that, more than anything else, ignited a fury in her heart, because Emily hadn't just lost a friend. She had lost control. She had lost the one person she thought would never leave. And so the messages began to change. Drafts that were never sent. Long, rambling paragraphs Emily wrote in the middle of the night. Some angry, some desperate, some terrifying. One simply read, "You don't get to forget me." Later, investigators will recover deleted messages. DMs that had been wiped, but not completely. They found voice notes that were never played. Searches for apps that let you send anonymous threats. But none of it was ever reported. Sarah, like most teenagers, brushed it off. She probably thought Emily was being dramatic. Maybe she even felt guilty. Maybe she hoped ignoring it would make things better. But what neither of them knew was that the danger wasn't in the messages themselves. It was in the silence that followed. The slow disconnection. The unsaid words that became poison. The online world had given Emily a place to obsess, to spiral, to feed the darkest parts of her mind without anyone knowing. Behind every emoji, every heart react, every laughing face, something sinister was hiding. A girl who felt abandoned. A girl who felt erased. A girl who had started believing that the only way to be seen again was to make sure no one could ever look away. And when that moment came, when Emily finally acted on all the words she had written and deleted, no one could say they were surprised. Because the truth was always there, hidden in plain sight, between the pixels and the posts, in the quiet corners of friendship destroyed not by one moment, but by 1,000 unseen cuts. The discovery of Emily's diary came days after the murder. It was found hidden at the back of her closet, inside a shoebox beneath old clothes and forgotten textbooks. A plain, spiral-bound notebook with a torn cover, ordinary in appearance, but inside it held the raw, unfiltered unraveling of a teenage mind teetering between anguish and obsession. Page after page, written in looping cursive and frenzied scribbles, revealed a story more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. At first glance, the entries seemed harmless. Lists of homework, complaints about teachers, reflections on school life. But as investigators flipped deeper into the notebook, the tone changed. The writing grew darker, more emotional, more erratic. There were entire pages filled with angry words scratched over and over again, names circled and crossed out, sentences half-written and abruptly ended. I hate how she makes me feel invisible. She's mine. She promised me forever. I watch her laugh, and I wonder if she's laughing at me. These weren't random thoughts. They were signals, patterns of emotional fixation that blurred the lines between friendship and possession. The diary read like a descent, a gradual collapse of reality, where Emily's world shrank until only Sarah remained at its center. Every slight, every ignored text, every skipped hangout became a betrayal. Emily wasn't just hurt. She felt abandoned, erased, forgotten, and she couldn't accept that. One entry stood out more than any other. It was written just 2 nights before the murder. I had a dream I was holding the knife. She was looking at me, but she wasn't scared. She just looked disappointed. I don't want to hurt her. I want her to understand. I want her to feel what I feel. I want her to see me. I don't think she ever really did. Psychologists later described it as a textbook case of identity enmeshment, a state where one person's sense of self becomes entirely dependent on another. For Emily, Sarah wasn't just a friend. She was a mirror, a lifeline, the only proof that Emily mattered. When that mirror cracked, when that lifeline was pulled away, something inside her snapped. There were signs of depression, pages where Emily questioned her own worth, scribbled thoughts about not existing, lines like, "I'm tired of being the one who loves more," and "maybe if I disappear, she'll finally notice." But interlaced with that sadness was something far more chilling, a quiet, deliberate rage. Emily never described herself as out of control. Quite the opposite. She knew what she was feeling. She understood the depth of her obsession. And in some twisted part of her mind, she believed it was justified. Was it mental illness? Or was it something else? A generation growing up in silence, online, surrounded by curated lives and filtered friendships. A culture where validation is currency and emotional intensity is often mistaken for loyalty. Emily didn't grow up learning how to process rejection. She learned how to bury it, to mask it, to let it fester. Some pages were almost poetic in their pain. She was sunlight, and I was a shadow following behind her, hoping to be seen. But light doesn't notice shadows. It just keeps shining. Others were hauntingly direct. If I can't be her favorite person, I'll be the last one she ever thinks about. That sentence, in particular, became central to the prosecution's argument. It wasn't written in rage. It wasn't scribbled or crossed out. It was printed neatly, carefully, like something planned, not felt in the moment, but believed. And that's what made it so terrifying, because it meant Emily wasn't lost in a wave of madness. She was aware. She was hurting, yes, but also calculating. She wanted her pain to be seen, to be acknowledged, and when she felt invisible for too long, she chose the one act she knew no one could ignore. The diary was filled with metaphors, dreams, fragmented thoughts, but behind all the poetic language was a single truth. Emily wanted to matter more than she wanted to heal. And so, in the end, the diary posed a question more disturbing than any courtroom could answer. Was this a case of mental illness spiraling into violence, or a dangerous blend of emotional dependency, teenage desperation, and deliberate choice? Emily wrote her final entry the night before she brought the knife to school. It read, "Tomorrow, everything changes. I'm not afraid. I just want peace. And if peace only comes after the storm, then let it storm." And it did. The school bathroom was one of the few places students could escape the constant eyes of teachers and classmates. A brief moment of solitude, a space where whispered conversations, tears, and secrets often unfolded. But on that day, it became something else entirely. It became the scene of tragedy so shocking, so intimate, that even seasoned detectives struggled to describe it without pausing. It was just after third period when Emily asked to go to the bathroom. She didn't seem nervous. Surveillance footage later showed her walking calmly down the hallway, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her expression unreadable. No one stopped her. No one suspected anything. A few minutes later, Sarah followed. Some said she had received a message from Emily. Others believed it was just coincidence. But there was no doubt. They entered the same bathroom within minutes of each other. Inside, the space was empty. 3 stalls, 1 mirror, a flickering light that had needed replacing for weeks. Sarah stood at the sink, checking her reflection, tying her hair back. Emily was already inside the last stall, waiting. Later, investigators would piece together the sequence through forensic evidence, audio captured faintly on a nearby security mic, and the testimony of a student who heard a scream, but assumed it was just another prank. It started with a conversation, words exchanged in hushed tones. Emily stepped out of the stall, and the door shut behind her. What exactly was said may never be known. Some pages from Emily's diary suggest she planned to confront Sarah, to make her see the truth. Others believe it was always meant to end in violence. But what is certain is this. Within minutes, the tone of the conversation shifted. Raised voices, an argument, and then silence. The silence didn't last long. A scream rang out, sharp, high-pitched, panicked. One student in the adjacent hallway heard it clearly but dismissed it. "Girls scream all the time," she later said. "I didn't think it was serious." That single moment, when someone could have rushed in, opened the door, interrupted what was unfolding, was lost. Inside that bathroom, behind a locked stall door, Sarah struggled. The autopsy later revealed defensive wounds, scratches, bruises, a desperate attempt to block the knife. But Emily was focused, unrelenting. The first strike hit Sarah's arm. The second went deeper. And then came the one that silenced her forever, a precise, brutal stab to the neck. The sound of her collapsing echoed in that tiny space. Blood spread across the floor, seeping under the stall door, reaching toward the center of the room. Emily stood over her, breathing heavily. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She just stood there, staring as if in a trance. When the bathroom door finally opened, when a teacher, alerted by another student's concern, entered the hallway, it was too late. Sarah was already gone. Emily stood motionless, the knife still in her hand, her white school shirt soaked in red. Her first words, spoken in a calm, steady voice, would haunt everyone who heard them. "I stabbed her in the neck." The ambulance arrived within minutes, but they were minutes that didn't matter. The damage had been done. The hallway outside the bathroom was sealed off, police were called, and the rest of the school day was canceled. Parents arrived in tears. News crews began circling before sunset, but the question that no one could stop asking was simple, devastating, and impossible to answer. Why there? Why in the bathroom? Maybe it was symbolic, private, hidden, the same way their friendship had begun and ended. Maybe Emily chose it because she knew no one would interrupt them there. Or maybe, in some twisted way, she wanted it to be remembered. A place once meant for mirrors and lipstick became the stage for a final, violent act of obsession and betrayal. The janitor who cleaned the bathroom days later refused to speak to media. One witness said he took down the mirror. Another said he simply wept. The stall where it happened was removed. The walls were repainted. But the students never forgot. They avoided that bathroom. Some said they could still hear the echo of that scream. Some transferred schools. Others never spoke about it again. And in the center of it all, the question lingers. What was Sarah's last thought? Was it confusion? Betrayal? Did she realize, in those final seconds, that the person she had trusted the most had become her executioner? We may never know. But the sound of that final scream, the one that should have been a warning, the one that was ignored, remains, not just in the school, but in every parent's mind, every friend's heart, every classroom where silence hides a storm. It happened in an instant, but that instant rewrote the lives of everyone who would ever hear the story. Emily's hand trembled slightly as she reached into her bag. It was a moment rehearsed in her mind 100 times, maybe more. In the privacy of her bedroom, she had thought about the weight of the knife, the way the blade would feel in her grip, how she would time it perfectly, just when Sarah let her guard down. And now there they were, 2 girls in a locked school bathroom, a space that had always meant safety and privacy, now turned into a theater of horror. Sarah was talking, not yelling, not crying, just talking, probably trying to reason with Emily, to de-escalate whatever strange, uncomfortable energy was filling the air. She might have sensed something was wrong. Maybe it was Emily's eyes. Maybe it was her tone. Or maybe it was the silence that came just before the act. Emily didn't scream. She didn't give a dramatic warning. There was no cinematic build-up. She simply reached into her backpack, pulled out the knife, and took one step forward. It was small, a kitchen knife, silver with a black handle, the kind used to slice fruit or vegetables. Harmless in any other setting, devastating in her hand. Sarah froze. In that split second, her brain likely struggled to process what she was seeing. Her best friend, her confidant, the person who had been at her birthday parties, who had cried with her over breakups, who had shared secrets late at night under fairy lights, now standing in front of her, holding a weapon. "What are you doing?" Those may have been her last words. Or maybe she never got the chance to speak. Emily lunged. The first cut wasn't fatal. It landed on Sarah's arm as she tried to shield herself. A defensive move driven more by reflex than conscious thought. Blood splattered across the sink. The mirror. Sarah screamed. A sharp, raw sound that echoed off the cold tiles, muffled only slightly by the bathroom walls. It was that scream that made a freshman down the hall stop in her tracks. She hesitated, unsure if it was a prank or something worse. She never told anyone what she'd heard until much later. The second strike was more precise. Emily aimed higher this time, closer to the neck, closer to where she had read vital arteries lay hidden beneath skin. The stab sank deeper. The scream turned into a gasp. And then came the fall. Sarah collapsed onto the floor, her knees hitting first, then her shoulder, then her head. Her hair, once tied up in a neat ponytail, fanned out across the tiles, darkened by blood. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. Her hands moved aimlessly, grasping at the air, at the wound, at anything. Emily stood over her, the knife still in her hand, her expression blank. Not angry, not panicked, just hollow, as if the part of her that once felt emotion had disconnected completely. The part that used to love Sarah. The part that used to laugh at her jokes. It was gone. It took only seconds. But time works differently in moments like these. For Sarah, those seconds stretched into eternity. Confusion, pain, realization. For Emily, they collapsed into a single truth. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Blood pooled beneath Sarah's head. The metallic scent filled the room. Emily finally stepped back. She looked down at her hands, at the red streaks across her fingers, her sleeves. She blinked slowly, as if waking from a dream. She dropped the knife. When the teacher burst through the bathroom door minutes later, summoned by a panicked student who had finally told someone about the scream, Emily didn't run. She didn't speak. She simply turned toward the intruder, her face pale, and said what would become the line repeated in headlines for weeks to come. "I stabbed her in the neck." The teacher screamed. More staff arrived. Someone called 911, but the emergency team came too late. Sarah's pulse was faint by the time they lifted her into the ambulance. By the time her parents were called, she was already gone. But something else had been lost in that moment, too, something harder to define. The illusion of safety. The belief that school bathrooms were just places for touch-ups and gossip. The assumption that two girls whispering behind closed doors were just sharing secrets, not planning a murder. In that single moment, when Emily reached into her bag and pulled out that blade, the entire world shifted. She wasn't a victim of circumstance. She wasn't overwhelmed by rage. She was calm, intentional, prepared. And from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. The words echoed in the sterile air of the school hallway, cutting through the panic like a razor. Emily stood still, blood splattered across her uniform, the knife lying just inches away on the bathroom floor. Her voice was calm, unnervingly calm, not shaking, not hysterical, not crying, just flat, steady, and almost quiet. "I stabbed her in the neck." To those who heard it, teachers, administrators, first responders, it was a confession, a spontaneous admission of guilt spoken in the raw aftermath of unthinkable violence. But as investigators replayed that moment over and over again in their minds, listening to eyewitness reports and studying Emily's demeanor, another question began to form. Was it really just a confession? Or was there something else hidden in that sentence? Was it pride? There was no tremble in her tone, no tears in her eyes, no trembling hands. Just those 7 words, as if she were stating a fact, explaining an outcome, not regretting a choice. And that, more than anything, disturbed the people in that hallway. From the moment she uttered those words, the case took a darker turn. This wasn't a crime of sudden passion. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was something far more chilling, deliberate, premeditated, almost clinical. Emily had not only carried out the act, she had narrated it. When police arrived minutes later, Emily repeated the sentence to the arresting officer. I stabbed her in the neck. She didn't ask if Sarah was okay. She didn't ask what would happen next. She didn't plead. She didn't cry. She just watched. Later, during the initial interrogation, a detective asked her why she had done it. Emily stared at the table for several long seconds before replying. She needed to understand how much she hurt me. Her voice didn't waver. Her eyes didn't flicker. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't even anger. It was conviction. Prosecutors later described her tone as disturbingly composed. They said it wasn't just a girl who had lost control. It was a girl who had regained it by ending someone else's. The question of whether Emily's statement was a confession or a boast became central to the court case. Defense attorneys argued that she was in shock, emotionally numb, and dissociating from reality, that her mind couldn't process what had happened, that she spoke those words without understanding their weight. They painted her as a child lost in trauma, incapable of grasping the full horror of her actions. But the prosecution saw it differently. They pointed to her diary entries, to the search history on her phone, to the fact that she had chosen a knife from the kitchen drawer and hidden it in her bag, to the deleted messages, the text that was never sent. If I do this, will you finally see me? They painted Emily not as broken, but as calculated, not as a victim, but as someone who believed she was taking back control. And in that light, her words, I stabbed her in the neck, sounded less like an admission and more like a declaration, as if she wanted it known, as if she needed it to be remembered. Psychologists analyzing her behavior noted something chilling, that Emily seemed to derive a sense of identity from the act. Then, in the absence of love, friendship, or validation, she found power, control, attention, all the things she felt Sarah had taken from her. And now, with a single violent act, she had taken everything from Sarah. And in doing so, perhaps she believed she had made herself unforgettable. There's a moment, caught on security footage, where Emily is being led down the hallway in handcuffs. Her face is blank. Reporters later claimed she smirked. That footage has never been released publicly. But the debate still rages. Was that the face of a teenager who finally realized the enormity of what she had done? Or someone who believed, even for a second, that she had won? Because sometimes the most terrifying thing about a killer isn't the weapon in their hand. It's the calm in their voice, the stillness after the storm, the quiet certainty with which they say the most horrifying words imaginable, not with fear, but with finality. I stabbed her in the neck. Was it confession? Or was it the sound of a girl who believed she had just written her own legend in blood? Detective Marcus Hale had seen his share of darkness. With over 15 years in juvenile crimes, he had walked through blood-stained living rooms, sat across from trembling teenagers, and read the cold facts of the most senseless acts. But when the call came in from West Ridge High School that morning, something about the dispatch made his stomach twist. Teenage girl stabbed. Suspect is also a teenage girl. Confession on scene. He arrived within 30 minutes. The school was already swarmed. Police tape stretched across the bathroom hallway. Teachers weeping quietly in corners. Students held in classrooms under lockdown. Parents had begun gathering outside, panicked, pressing against barriers for any glimpse of their children. The principal met him at the entrance, her hands shaking, her face ghost white. It was one of her friends, she said, voice cracking. They were best friends. Marcus had heard that before. Friendships turned sour. But nothing could have prepared him for the stillness of the scene inside that bathroom. Blood was everywhere. On the sink, splattered across the wall, congealed near the base of the third stall. Sarah's body had already been moved, but her outline remained in Marcus's mind like a ghost he couldn't shake. And then there was Emily, sitting quietly in the nurse's office, hands cuffed in front of her, eyes fixed on the floor. She looked small, just a girl in a school uniform, brown hair tucked neatly behind her ears, knees pulled up slightly as if waiting for a scolding, not a life sentence. And that's what stopped Marcus. He'd interrogated gang members, child abusers, teenagers who claimed innocence even as the evidence buried them. But this girl, she didn't look like a killer. Still, protocol took over. He introduced himself, asked her basic questions. She answered each one softly, politely, without hesitation. Name, age, grade. And then, as he flipped open his notepad, he asked, "Emily, can you tell me what happened?" She blinked, looked up for the first time, and with that same flat, emotionless tone, she replied, "I stabbed her in the neck." Marcus had heard confessions before, some tearful, some angry, some denying until the end. But this was different. There was no remorse in her voice, no shock, no confusion, just clarity, like she was recounting a math problem she'd solved in class. He leaned back. For a moment, his brain struggled to accept what his ears had just heard. He wanted to believe this girl had been coerced, that she was protecting someone, that she didn't mean what she said. So he asked again, "Why?" She shrugged. "Because she didn't listen. She left me." Marcus would later describe it as the first time in his career where he genuinely questioned reality. Not because the evidence was unclear, it was overwhelming, but because something in him resisted the idea that such calculated violence could live inside someone so young, so composed, so ordinary. In the weeks that followed, Marcus read Emily's diary, watched the school security footage, interviewed her teachers, friends, parents. Nothing added up. She had no criminal record, no prior incidents, no mental health diagnosis, just pages and pages of quiet pain that no one had taken seriously. A slow descent into obsession that no adult had noticed until exploded. When he testified in court, Marcus didn't try to dramatize his words. But when asked what struck him most, he paused and said, "It wasn't the knife. It wasn't the blood. It was the way she looked at me and said what she did, as if she truly believed she had done the right thing." That haunted him. Still does. Because as a detective, Marcus was trained to look for lies, inconsistencies, signs of manipulation. But with Emily, there were none. Just truth, spoken coldly, clearly, without apology. And perhaps that's why it shook him to the core. Because in that moment, when a teenage girl calmly confessed to killing her best friend with the same ease she might order coffee, Detective Marcus Hale realized something he would never forget. Even the most innocent faces can hide unimaginable darkness. And sometimes the eyes don't lie, not because they can't, but because what they see is too horrific to believe. The courtroom was silent as Emily was brought in. Her wrists bound gently in front of her, a soft clinking sound the only noise she made. She wore a simple navy blue sweater and black pants. No makeup, no jewelry. Her hair was neatly combed. She looked like any other teenage girl on any other ordinary day. But nothing about this day or this girl was ordinary. Reporters filled the benches. Some scribbled in notebooks. Others held their breaths, watching through phone cameras as the accused took her seat at the defense table. On the opposite side, Sarah's family sat in rigid silence, her mother gripping a tissue that was already soaked with tears, her father with his hands clenched into fists, his eyes fixed not on Emily, but on the floor, as if looking at her might unleash something he wouldn't be able to control. The judge, a seasoned woman with decades on the bench, took one long look at Emily before beginning. Her gaze lingered, as though she, too, couldn't quite believe that someone so young, so composed, could be the same person who had committed such a brutal act. But belief wasn't the issue. The evidence was clear. What the court now needed was understanding and justice. The prosecution began with a timeline. Cold, methodical, undeniable. Security footage. Digital forensics. Diary entries. Text messages, some deleted, some recovered. The knife found at the scene. The blood patterns. The fingerprints. The confession. They played the 911 call. The operator's voice calm, trying to remain composed as a frantic teacher described what she had walked into. There's blood everywhere. She's just standing there. I think she's still holding the knife. Then came the testimony from a first officer on the scene. She looked at me and said, "I stabbed her in the neck." No emotion, just said it like she was telling me her name. Gasps broke out in the gallery. Sarah's mother sobbed uncontrollably, but Emily remained still, unflinching, as though she were watching someone else's trial unfold before her. The defense followed with their argument. Emily, they said, was a child, not a monster. She was emotionally unstable. She had suffered silently. Her mental health had been overlooked. Her obsession wasn't born from cruelty, but from deep, unprocessed pain. They didn't deny the act. They didn't need to. What they wanted was mercy, not for the sake of excusing what had happened, but because Emily, they argued, had never been taught how to survive loss, abandonment, or heartbreak. She didn't want to kill Sarah, her lawyer said, voice trembling. She just wanted the pain to stop. She wanted to be seen, to be heard, and no one was listening. And then came the diary. It was read aloud in court, page after page. Some pages drew murmurs. Others drew silence, so thick it became suffocating. If she keeps ignoring me, I'll disappear. Or maybe she will. I don't want to hurt her, but I need her to feel what I feel. I want to be the last thought she ever has. Words written by a girl who looked like she should be at cheer practice, not facing a potential life sentence. The most haunting moment came when Sarah's little sister took the stand. Her voice cracked as she described hearing her parents scream when they got the call. She talked about Sarah's laugh, her favorite songs, how she used to braid her hair every morning before school, and how, now, every silence in their home feels like a scream. Emily blinked slowly as the girl spoke. Her lips trembled for the first time, but no tears fell. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. And then the verdict came. Guilty, not just of murder, but of intent. The court acknowledged her age, her emotional struggles, but it couldn't overlook the preparation, the clarity, the calm aftermath. Emily had chosen this, and now she would face the consequences. As the sentence was read, Sarah's father broke down in sobs. Emily's mother, seated behind her, wept into her hands. But Emily simply looked forward, frozen, as if she had already known what was coming, as if the worst part had already happened the moment she drove that knife into her best friend's neck. Because no matter what punishment the court handed down, she had already sentenced herself. A life haunted not just by what she had done, but by who she had once been. And so, the courtroom, once filled with hopeful parents and innocent dreams, closed its doors on a tragedy that would never truly end. A teenage girl had been murdered. Another had become a murderer. And in the space between those two truths, the question would always linger. What turned a smile into a weapon? And how many chances did the world miss to stop it before it was too late? The courtroom had heard evidence, expert opinions, forensic analysis, even pages from a diary soaked in emotional despair and calculated intent. But nothing struck the human soul more deeply than the moment Sarah's parents took the stand. It was no longer about blood patterns or legal definitions. It was about loss, raw, unfiltered, and devastating. Sarah's mother was called first. She walked slowly to the witness chair, clutching a crumpled tissue in her hand, her shoulders visibly trembling. The room, which had been tense all day, fell into a hush so profound it seemed to stretch time. Everyone in that courtroom knew this was not just testimony. This was grief in its purest form. She sat down, took a shaky breath, and began to speak, not to the judge, not to the attorneys, not even the jury, but to her daughter. She was my sunshine, always humming, always laughing. Even when things were hard at home, even when we argued, she found a way to make us smile. And now, I wake up every morning and for a split second, I forget. I think I hear her brushing her hair in the bathroom. I think she'll walk into the kitchen and ask what's for breakfast. And then I remember her voice cracked. She pressed the tissue to her face. Then I remember that my daughter died on a bathroom floor, alone, bleeding, while I was at work thinking she was safe. She turned slightly to glance at Emily, who sat motionless at the defense table, her eyes lowered. I trusted the world with her. I trusted the school. I trusted her friends. And one of those friends took her from me. Took her in the most violent, unimaginable way. I don't understand it. I still don't. The court clerk passed her a glass of water. She shook her head. I don't want water. I want my daughter back. Next came Sarah's father. Taller, older, worn down by days of silence and nights of sobbing behind closed doors. His eyes were bloodshot but dry, the kind of dryness that comes after crying until nothing is left. I taught her how to ride a bike, he began quietly. I taught her to swim. I held her hand on the first day of school. I told her to be kind to people. That kindness was a strength. He paused, looking straight ahead, jaw clenched. And that strength is what got her killed. The silence in the courtroom grew heavier. She was too kind, too trusting. She believed people could change, that they meant well, even when they didn't. He inhaled slowly. I saw Emily at birthday parties. I saw her laughing with my daughter. I never once imagined that she'd be the reason I had to pick out a coffin. His voice hardened. You think you can prepare for tragedy. You imagine what it would be like to lose a job, to get sick, to struggle. But nothing prepares you to bury your child. He looked at the judge, then at the jury. This wasn't just a teenage fight. This wasn't a mistake. This was murder. Cold, planned, and my family will never recover from it. He didn't cry. His pain was beyond tears. When he stepped down, the air in the courtroom felt suffocating. Even the defense attorney lowered his eyes. Emily's parents were called next. Her mother took the stand with a look of quiet devastation. Not the grief of losing someone, but the torment of knowing your child had taken someone else's. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the microphone. I don't know what to say, she began, because nothing I say can make this better. Nothing can undo what happened. But I need you to know we didn't see it coming. We loved her. We raised her to be kind. We had no idea she was in pain, that she was unraveling. Her voice broke. I failed her. I didn't see the signs. I thought I was protecting her, but I wasn't. I missed something. Something big. And now another family is living through a nightmare because of my daughter. She looked towards Sarah's parents. I'm sorry. I know it's not enough. But I am so sorry. But it wasn't about forgiveness anymore. Not in that moment. It was about sorrow that bound two families together in a way no one ever wanted. One had lost a daughter. The other had to live knowing their daughter had taken a life. And as both sets of parents left a witness stand, the courtroom understood something that couldn't be said in legal language, couldn't be captured in evidence folders or witness testimonies. There is a kind of pain that words can't hold, a kind of silence that screams louder than anything, a kind of heartbreak that turns even the strongest into shadows of who they once were. And that day, in that courtroom, everyone, judge, jury, audience, felt it. They didn't just hear the story of a murder. They felt the aftershock of it. The crime had barely made it through the evening news before the story exploded across social media like wildfire. Hashtags trended within hours. Photos of Sarah, her smiling face from a school yearbook, a candid shot from a class trip, a filtered selfie with hearts on Instagram, were everywhere. People reposted them with broken heart emojis, candle icons, and captions that read, "Justice for Sarah." The tragedy wasn't just a private loss anymore. It had become a public event, dissected and debated by millions of strangers with keyboards and opinions. On Twitter, the outrage was immediate. How does a teenager plan a murder and no one notices? Where were the school counselors? Why didn't anyone read the signs? The blame spread fast. Teachers, parents, friends, even the system itself. A screenshot of Emily's confession, crudely summarized and often misquoted, circulated with terrifying speed. She said she stabbed her and didn't even flinch. People wanted answers. But more than that, they wanted someone to pay. On Instagram, Sarah's page became a digital memorial. Her last post, a simple selfie with a caption, "Felt cute today," filled up with comments by the thousands. "You didn't deserve this. Rest in power, Angel. We won't let them forget what she did to you. Her follower count doubled in 2 days. People she never knew grieved her like she was their own sister. Because in a world hungry for stories, especially tragic ones, Sarah had become a symbol, a martyr of teenage betrayal. But just as swiftly, the tide turned toward Emily. Her face, pulled from a year-old class photo, was plastered across news blogs, YouTube thumbnails, and TikTok commentary videos. Some blurred her eyes. Most didn't. Despite her being a minor, the court of public opinion had no interest in protecting her identity. And so, the narrative began. The smiling killer. The best friend butcher. Teenage psycho. Videos speculated about her mental health. TikToks dramatized her diary entries. Edits appeared showing her face morphing into images of serial killers. Content designed to shock, to enrage, to entertain. The line between justice and spectacle blurred. Some users demanded she be tried as an adult, sentenced to life. Others called for revenge, graphic, violent comments that spoke more to a hunger for punishment than for healing. Petitions circulated, calling for policy changes in schools, for better access to mental health care, for tighter controls on minors' access to social media. But underneath even those noble causes was a thirst for blame, for certainty in a story that felt unbearable in its cruelty. Even those who spoke up for Emily, suggesting she was mentally unwell, that she had been failed by every adult around her, faced backlash. Don't defend a murderer, one commenter wrote. She didn't snap, she calculated. In a way, both girls had been stripped of their humanity. Sarah became a symbol, a hashtag, a cautionary tale of trust gone wrong. Emily became a villain, a face to fear, a name to spit in anger. And the tragedy, the unbearable reality that 2 teenage girls' lives had been destroyed, was buried beneath viral sound bites and opinion threads. Justice became content. Outrage became currency. And somewhere in the middle, the truth, the raw, complex, agonizing truth, was drowned by the noise. The question that lingered wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was deeper, more disturbing. Were people really demanding justice? Or were they just looking for someone to destroy? Because in the digital age, every tragedy becomes performance. And when blood is spilled, the crowd doesn't always cry for peace. Sometimes they cry for more blood. The photograph was taken just seconds after Emily was let out of the courtroom on the second day of her trial. A swarm of journalists surrounded her. Flashes went off. Microphones stretched forward. Voices clamored for a glimpse, a quote, anything. She didn't say a word. But what stunned everyone watching, what went viral within hours, was her expression. She smiled. It wasn't a wide, gleeful grin. It was subtle, small, almost imperceptible. But it was there, a soft, controlled lift at the corners of her mouth as her eyes met a camera lens. And that single moment, captured in a frozen frame, unleashed a storm that no one, not the court, not her defense, not even Emily's own family, was prepared for. Across the internet, the image was shared, dissected, memed, analyzed. The killer smiles, zero remorse. Look at her face. This is what evil looks like. Is she proud of what she did? Comment sections filled with rage. News anchors paused dramatically before flashing the image on screen. Even psychologists were called on to interpret the gesture. Was it defiance, disconnection, shock, or something more calculated? To those watching, the implications were unbearable. That this teenage girl, this murderer, wasn't sorry. That she had taken a life and felt nothing but attention, maybe even satisfaction. And perhaps the most chilling possibility of all, that she enjoyed the spotlight. Inside the courtroom, the smile was seen differently. Her defense attorney insisted it wasn't a smirk, but a reflex, nervousness, the way some people laugh in funerals or cry when they're happy. She's a child, he said. Children don't know how to process trauma. That smile means nothing. But many disagreed. The prosecution played surveillance footage from the courthouse hallway. In it, Emily glanced toward the cameras, tucked her hair behind her ear, and smiled again, this time slightly longer, slightly more certain. Not the kind of smile that escapes unintentionally, but one that seemed to carry meaning. Emily never explained it, never gave an interview, never clarified her intent. And that silence only fed the speculation. Was it guilt trying to hide itself behind a mask? Was it a moment of mental collapse, a disconnect between action and consequence? Or had she, in some twisted way, found the attention she had longed for all along? Her diary offered disturbing insight. One entry, dated 2 weeks before the murder, read, "Sometimes I imagine what they'll say if I disappear. Or if she does. Maybe for once. They'll talk about me. Maybe I won't be invisible anymore." Another, more cryptic, said, "They don't see you until you break something." Was that smile a signal that she believed she'd finally been seen? That after years of emotional obscurity, being overlooked, dismissed, ignored, she had done the one thing no one could ignore? Some believed so. Others insisted she was simply numb. A girl who committed something so horrific that her brain had disconnected completely from her reality, floating in a cloud of denial where smiling was the only instinct left. Trauma does strange things to the human mind. And Emily, barely 16, was in waters far too deep for most adults to comprehend. But intent doesn't always matter to the world. What the world saw was a killer smiling. And in that one image, people projected their fears, their judgments, their thirst for clarity in a case that offered none. They wanted her to cry, to collapse, to beg for forgiveness. Instead, she smiled. And in doing so, Emily transformed once again, not just from student to murderer, but from murderer to symbol, a face the internet wouldn't forget, a girl whose crime became entertainment, and whose reaction became obsession. But the truth? Maybe even Emily herself didn't know why she smiled. Maybe it was a final act of rebellion. Maybe it was the mask cracking. Maybe it was her way of saying, "Now you see me." Or maybe, just maybe, it was the moment she realized she would never be seen as anything else again. Not a daughter, not a friend, not a child, just a killer, smiling into history. The day of sentencing arrived under gray skies, as if the weather itself sensed the weight of what was about to unfold. Reporters filled the courthouse steps before sunrise. Cameras clicked. News vans idled, humming quietly. Inside, the gallery was full. Family members, former classmates, teachers, strangers who had followed the case online, all drawn to witness the moment justice would speak. Emily sat beside her attorney, wearing the same navy blue sweater she had worn on the first day of trial. Her hair was pulled back, her face pale, unreadable. For weeks, she had sat in silence as her life was unwrapped, piece by painful piece, for the court to examine. Now, everything came down to this final moment. The judge entered, and the room stood. Sarah's parents sat together in the front row. Her mother clutched a locket with her daughter's picture inside, while her father never once took his eyes off the bench. Emily was facing sentencing for first-degree murder. The courtroom had already accepted the facts. Emily had planned the killing. She had researched the fatal spot on the human body. She had brought a knife to school. She had lured her best friend into an isolated space. And she had confessed without remorse. But her age complicated everything. She was 15, a child in the eyes of the law, but one who had committed an adult crime. The prosecution pushed for the maximum penalty under juvenile law, decades in prison with the possibility of transfer to an adult facility. They argued that Emily had shown intent, clarity, and a complete absence of empathy, that this was not a momentary breakdown, but controlled, methodical act of violence. The defense pleaded for leniency. They presented letters from therapists, teachers, even Emily's childhood pediatrician. They pointed to her clean record, her untreated emotional struggles, the toxic dynamics of her friendship with Sarah. They said what she needed wasn't a prison, but help, intervention, rehabilitation, a second chance. Then came the judge's voice, measured, deliberate, heavy with finality. She acknowledged the tragedy from all sides. The unimaginable pain of Sarah's parents. The irreversible loss of a bright young girl whose only mistake was trusting the wrong person. But she also acknowledged the failure of a system that had allowed Emily to fall through its cracks. A system that had never seen her pain until it turned deadly. And then she delivered the sentence. Emily would be committed to a high-security juvenile facility until her 25th birthday, the longest sentence available under juvenile law. Upon turning 25, a full psychological evaluation would determine whether she would be released or transferred to an adult prison to serve an additional term based on her rehabilitation and risk to society. The courtroom was still. No gasps, no outbursts, just silence. Sarah's mother wept quietly. Her father exhaled a long, slow breath, neither satisfied nor angry, just empty. Because justice doesn't feel like justice when it comes late. It feels like a bandage placed over a wound that will never close. For some, the sentence wasn't enough. 10 years for a life taken? They asked on social media. She'll walk free before she's 30. Others believed it was fair, harsh, even, for a child who had clearly broken but never received help. And still others believed no punishment would ever feel complete, because the dead don't come back. And the living are left with scars that no courtroom can heal. Emily showed no reaction when the sentence was read. No relief, no protest, only a slow blink and a single nod as she was escorted away. The doors closed behind her, and the world moved on. But in homes, in hearts, in the echoing corridors of West Ridge High, the question still lingered. Was this justice, or was it a warning delivered too late? Because sometimes the system doesn't fail with a bang. It fails with silence. And when it finally speaks, it leaves everyone wondering, was this a sound of closure or the confirmation that we were never really listening at all? West Ridge High reopened 2 weeks after the sentencing, but nothing was the same. The hallways felt quieter, the classrooms dimmer. The laughter that once echoed between periods now came in cautious, uneven bursts. Students moved in clusters, eyes lowered. Conversations hushed, as if speaking too loudly might summon the memory they were all trying to suppress. And at the far end of the school courtyard, beneath the large oak tree that had stood there longer than most faculty had been alive, sat a wooden bench. It was unremarkable in design, just slats of fading wood and rusted bolts, but everyone knew what it was. That was their bench, Emily and Sarah's, where they had sat every day for 2 years, sharing lunches, secret study notes, and inside jokes, where they had whispered dreams of college and crushes, and what it would be like to live in a big city someday, where their friendship had flourished and quietly begun to decay. After the murder, the bench became something else, a symbol, a relic, a ghost of what once was. The school considered removing it. Some parents complained it was too painful a reminder, too morbid. But the students disagreed. In a quiet protest, they began leaving things there. Flowers, notes, drawings, ribbons with Sarah's name, postcards that said, "We miss you," and "You were light." One morning, a bouquet of sunflowers appeared, tied with string. No one claimed them. Another day, someone left a copy of a book Sarah had once done a report on, The Fault in Our Stars. It had her favorite quote underlined. "You gave me a forever within a numbered days." The bench remained. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was a memory carved into wood. A quiet monument to a friendship that had once felt unbreakable. A reminder that even the most beautiful bonds could be fragile. Inside the school, a memorial plaque was installed just outside the library. It bore Sarah's name, her photograph, and a quote chosen by her parents. To be remembered not for how she died, but how she lived. Kind, bright, trusting. But students still gravitated to the bench. Some sat there in silence, staring out into the courtyard. Others talked quietly, sometimes about Sarah, sometimes about their own friendships. Teachers occasionally stopped by, placing a hand on the wood before walking on. Even those who had never known Sarah personally felt its pull, because it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everything the bench now represented. Trust, love, loss, and the terrifying truth that sometimes the people we sit closest can become the ones who hurt us most. In the years that followed, no one dared to claim the bench as their own. It was left empty most days, a space untouched, a line no one crossed, except once. A year after the murder, on the anniversary of Sarah's death, a single student was seen sitting there alone, writing in a notebook. She placed the pen down, folded the paper, and tucked it under the bench. When the janitor found it later that night, He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short message. I was her friend, too. I saw what was happening. I didn't speak up. I'm sorry. No name. No return address. Just another fragment of pain added to the weight of that wooden bench. And so it stayed, not just as a place, but as a question. What if someone had noticed sooner? What if someone had said something? What if a friendship like Sarah and Emily's had ended with distance, not death? What if that bench had remained just a bench and not a monument to silence? In the end, the wood will rot, the metal will rust, but the memory of what could have been, will remain, etched not into the bench, but into every student who walks past it, and every soul forever marked by the cost of what happens when we fail to see the storm until it strikes. In the days following the verdict, as Emily was transferred to the juvenile correctional facility and Sarah's family retreated into mourning, the world outside the courtroom kept spinning, but not in silence. The public reaction surged like a tidal wave, unpredictable and often contradictory. What had begun as a local tragedy had become a national obsession, and soon obsession turned into division. Some call for reform, others call for blood. Social media, still ablaze from the trial coverage, became the battleground. Hashtags like Justice for Sarah, Lock Her Forever, and She Smiled After Killing trended for weeks. Petitions were launched to change juvenile sentencing laws, demanding harsher penalties for teenage offenders and violent crimes. People were outraged not just by what had happened, but by the possibility that Emily might one day walk free. Anger dominated most headlines. Talk show panels questioned her motives, her parents, the school system, and the mental health infrastructure. This wasn't just a broken child, one commentator said. This was a warning sign that we ignored. Memes surfaced, edits, conspiracy theories. Some swore that Emily had been influenced by online forums. Others claimed she was part of a cult-like teen obsession with death. None of it was proven, but that didn't stop the stories from spreading. Because for some people, the horror was enough. They wanted more. They wanted to explain it, package it, sensationalize it. And in that atmosphere, hatred flourished. Death threats were sent to Emily's parents. Protesters stood outside the courtroom during the sentencing, shouting no forgiveness into news cameras. One woman went viral after posting a video of herself burning a copy of Emily's diary, which she had printed from a leaked court transcript. But amid the rage, something else began to emerge, something more complicated, a quiet, uncomfortable undercurrent of sympathy. Some voices, though fewer in number, began asking harder questions. What kind of pain drives a child to kill? How could no one notice her dissent? Was Emily a cold-blooded murderer? Or a girl who cried for help in silence until that silence turned deadly? Psychologists began speaking out in interviews, urging the public to see the full picture. We cannot view this only through the lens of punishment. One said, if we don't ask why, we'll never stop this from happening again. Some former classmates shared posts not in defense of Emily's actions, but in acknowledgement of her loneliness. She was quiet, too quiet. We all saw it. No one asked her if she was okay. Others wrote about Sarah with reverence and heartbreak. She was sunshine, the kind of person who would give you her last pencil in class. She didn't deserve this. And in between these polls, outrage and empathy, was another reaction entirely. Fascination. Documentaries were announced. Podcasts lined up episodes. YouTubers broke down the crime, frame by frame. Titles like Inside the Mind of a Teenage Killer and The Smile That Shocked a Nation racked up millions of views. People watched. They commented. They debated. But few stopped to ask why they were so captivated. Because somewhere along the way, the line blurred. Was this about justice? Or was it just entertainment now? Had Sarah become a victim or a story to follow? Had Emily become a villain or a character in a macabre drama people couldn't stop binging? And in the noise of public reaction, so loud, so divided, the original tragedy began to fade. 2 girls, 1 dead, 1 lost, a friendship destroyed, a school scarred forever. Yet online it was content. And so the reactions kept coming, the hatred, the sympathy, the spectacle. A perfect storm of emotion in a world where pain is shared, debated, consumed, and too often forgotten once the next headline arrives. And the question lingers still. Did people want healing? Or did they just want a front row seat to the flames? Because when a crime becomes a hashtag and a tragedy becomes a trend, the lines between truth and sensation vanish, leaving behind only echoes of what we once called justice. There's a kind of friendship we all long for, deep, unshakable, forever. The kind where secrets are shared without fear, where silences are comfortable, where someone knows you so completely, it feels like they carry a piece of your soul. That's what Sarah and Emily had. At least, that's how it began. But this story, raw, brutal, unforgettable, teaches us that even the purest connections can become dangerous when built on imbalance, silence, and unmet needs. This wasn't just a murder. It was a failure of trust at every level. Sarah trusted Emily, maybe more than she should have. She overlooked the possessiveness, the controlling messages, the jealousy disguised as concern. She saw her friend in pain but didn't know how deep it went. And why would she? She was just a teenager herself, trying to navigate the messy, beautiful chaos of growing up. Emily, on the other hand, confused love with ownership. She mistook attention for identity. She didn't know how to ask for help in a way the world would listen to. So instead, she acted violently, permanently, in her mind. The betrayal she felt wasn't just emotional. It was existential. And the only way to be seen again was to make herself unforgettable. This story teaches us that friendship must be free to grow and free to end. That obsession isn't care. That control isn't loyalty. That silence isn't safety. It teaches us that teenagers are not too young to feel deeply, destructively, irrevocably. That behind a smile could be storm clouds. That in a diary could be a warning. That every "I'm fine" deserves a second glance, especially when whispered too often. It teaches us that no one becomes a monster overnight, that the signs were there, in missed conversations, in unread texts, in a girl sitting alone, thinking no one would ever hear her unless she screamed with something louder than words. It teaches us to ask the hard questions, to check in on our children, to listen, even when it's uncomfortable, to see, even when it's easier to look away. But most of all, it teaches us the tragic cost of silence. Because had someone noticed, really noticed, maybe this story would have ended with distance, not death. Maybe two girls would have gone their separate ways, brokenhearted but alive. Maybe Sarah would have gone on to live the full, bright life she deserved. Maybe Emily would have gotten help before she became someone she herself could no longer recognize. So the next time a friend pulls away, the next time someone says they're just tired a little too often, the next time a smile doesn't reach the eyes, ask again, listen harder, care deeper, because trust once broken can destroy not just bonds, but lives. And the line between love and ruin is thinner than we think. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to realize they were hiding a truth that shattered everything? If this story struck a chord in your heart, if it made you question the faces we trust, the friends we hold close, and the silence we often ignore, then don't let it end here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced betrayal disguised as friendship? Do you believe Emily was broken or just cruel? And what would you have done if you were Sarah? Your voice matters. Because these aren't just stories. They're reflections of the world we live in, of the secrets people carry, of the warnings we sometimes miss. Subscribe to Crime Chronicles Confidential, where we peel back the layers of everyday lives to uncover the darkness hidden beneath. And tell us, what mystery should we unravel next? Is there a case you can't stop thinking about? A crime that left you speechless? A truth that never got the spotlight it deserved? Your suggestion might just become our next deep dive into the heart of darkness. So don't just watch. Be part of the conversation. Because here, every comment could be the beginning of our next story.